So this is like a strategy for building your profile. You could do this. You could totally do this. So this is a strategy for building your profile, and it's using interviews. And so there's this section of marketing called content marketing. And basically marketing is like, you have a thing, you have a brand, or you have some stuff, and you're trying to get your thing and your stuff in front of people, but you're trying to get it in front of the right people and, all of that kind of stuff. And, in the past, we would have used like advertising, whether it was on TV or on the radio or on magazines and stuff like that there. And the problem with that kind of stuff is it's just like a broadcast. It goes to everybody. So it's not very specific, whereas with content marketing, we could write something that's just of interest to these people. So for example, you could do a series of icon breakdowns where you take your heroes and you take Vic Bell and Roger King and someone else like Cal Tisak, and you take their icons and you sort of break them apart and you explain how you make them, right? I'm Thaler and this is the School of Design. So this is a video and I'm going to try and put this onto the School of Design's YouTube channel as an experiment. We're just going to see. And this person here, I think there is Anda, and she was my first ever person at the School of Design. Amazing. So Anda will always have a special place in my heart. So interviews with thought leaders in your niche, okay? They are enjoyable. They teach you new lessons, and they also reach an existing audience that's beyond yours. So if we think about you as an example, you could go and ask to do an icon breakdown with Vic, and then you could build that content, and then you could ask her 3 questions. And then you can go and do the same thing with Roji and the same thing, and over time, you start to build up this really good resource, right? Really nice breakdowns of icons, really nice explanations and explaining how you do it in Figma and all of that kind of stuff. And this is content, but you're using it as a form of marketing. And I used to do this when I was in the Standardistas with my friend Nicholas. So we had a website and for about 5 years, we interviewed people. And we didn't really do it in a sense like as a strategy. If we interview all these people, we'll become famous. We more did it because we thought it was interesting and we would learn some things. So we interviewed some of the world's best designers. It was great. First person we asked was Elliot J. Stokes. He's a friend of mine. I was at his wedding and we know each other. We're both into music, but we just met each other on the internet and then in some real conferences back in the day when we could actually go to conferences, those amazing times. And then once we had that, we happened to know someone who knew Tim Van Dam, and we interviewed him and he became a friend of mine. And, we would ask these, I would write an introduction and I would say, Tim is a designer, writer, public speaker, superhero. He had this whole superhero alter ego called Max Voltaire. And, I would write this introduction, and then we would ask all these questions, and there was a dozen of them. And the questions at the end we'll come back to later. So what's your favorite tea? I only drink tea when I'm sick and prefer mint or black tea, right? But we're going to come back to that later, right? And that's where you can get that interview. So if you were to make a list of thought leaders, I really hate that term thought leaders, but you know what it means. It's the famous people who are thinking about stuff. I don't think that necessarily thought leaders need to be thinking people. For you, for example, if you think of Roji or Vic or, these people are known not so much for their thought leadership per se, more because they're amazing at what they do in their craftspeople. So a thought leader is like an informed opinion leader. Yeah, someone who's a trusted source. And the thing is, you're sort of getting into these people's orbit, okay? So if you look at what we used to do at the Standardistas, we were like in the middle and all of these other people were orbiting around us. And I made some of them orbit around us like this and some like orbit in different ways, right? So Tina Roth Eisenberg is on this other big orbit, right? She is Swiss Miss on the internet, but we called her Ms. Roth Eisenberg because all of our things were Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so. And that was kind of part of our brand. And Tina was like on this other orbit because she wasn't really web design. She was more like design and products and stuff. And Jessica was on a different kind of trajectory as well because she was some kind of web design, but mostly lettering like this, because this is by Jessica here. And so we would interview these people and that would bring their audience into our orbit as well. So I made this diagram. So we used to have 6,000 followers before we lost our Twitter. It just disappeared a year or so back, and we just lost it. It was a real shame because we put a lot of work into it. Anyway, we had 6,000 followers, and when we interviewed Josh, that was 32,000 people who were following him, who we would then say to Josh, would you mind tweeting about the interview? And that would bring some of those 32,000 people over, and they would be like, who are these guys, the Standardistas? And then Elliot had 44,000, and then I have to scale this down because the next set of people wouldn't fit onto this slide if we stick to the same scale. So I divide by 10, and now we've got this little tiny version. Jessica had 113,000 followers on Twitter, and Tina had nearly 500,000. I mean, it's amazing, really. We didn't pick these people because they had millions of followers. We picked them just because they were interesting. And once we picked a certain number, it got to a point where we could almost go and ask anybody. And they would look at the rest of the people who'd been interviewed and say, of course, So we were 6,000, and the sum total of all the people I just showed is 675,000. And that doesn't include everybody we interviewed. There's a lot of other people that we interviewed that haven't worked out the numbers and stuff. So I would say that through the strategy of building interviews with thought leaders and well-known people, we probably exposed our brand to about 1 million people, which is awesome, right? So we kind of set our sights super high. So Josh Brewer was the principal designer at Twitter. Jessica Hish, amazing lettering person. Tina, and we were able to sort of position ourselves, despite the fact that we were in Belfast, as being on the world stage. And that was really, really important to us. In terms of structuring the interviews, rather than doing each interview separately, which takes a bit of thinking and requires a lot of thought, we did them in a standardized way. The first thing is we always called everybody Mr. or Ms. Everyone else would be interviewing Swiss Miss. We were interviewing Ms. Roth Eisenberg. And it was just part of our brand. We used kind of unusual words, and we were a bit old-fashioned. So standardization saves time because you don't have to think about it. It means everything looks very consistent, and it also looks professional. So it was always the same structure. I write an introduction. We ask the first 3 questions, always the same. The middle 6 were tailored to the person, and then the closing 3 were the same. So we always asked at the beginning, where did you learn your craft? Who inspires you, and what are your influences? That was something we asked everybody because we just thought that was interesting. And then the closing questions, because it was web design, it was a mix of design and code. So we had, what's your favorite typeface, and what's your favorite plain text editor, which was like, what do you code in? And then what's your favorite tea? Because when we'd written our book, at the end of every chapter, we said, do your homework and get a cup of Lapsang Souchong when you're finished. And as we made our way through the book, we kept adding these teas. And then the illustrations were always done in this kind of very Mr. Murphy style. I've always taken these little tiny crops. Every website I've done always looks the same. The new website for the School of Design is the same again, but I just like it. That's just me, and I have my style. Consistency A+, content B+. Actually, it would be great if consistency and content were both A+. But what's more important is that you constantly hit that, if you decide you're going to do it every month, you do one a month. If you decide you're going to do one every 2 months, you do it every 2 months. The content can drop a touch, right? It's actually the consistency that's more important. And this is true of newsletters and things like that as well. So, you need to keep your standards high, but the scheduling and posting trumps everything. Can't help but see the word Trump and think of the disastrous situation that's happening in the USA just now. The other thing you could do is build a content calendar. So actually, I'm going to make a content calendar. I'm going to put it into the library, and I will put the link to the library down here. I think it's down here somewhere underneath the post. Anyway. So curation, work your way up the celebrity scale. We started in the middle, I don't really think of it this way. To me, Elliot's not less famous than Tina. It doesn't really kind of work that way. If you start to think about fame, it all screws things up, I think. It's more like Elliot's a friend, and it was interesting interviewing him, and Josh is a friend, it was interesting interviewing him. If you're doing this from a strategic point of view and you don't know anybody, Here's how you do the middle and then you work your way up. So when I ran my record label, we did a 24 CD box set, and my first artist was a guy called Pimon, who was big in my area of music, but not super famous. But he was respected and kind of middle tier, right? And I went to him, and then I went to someone else who was around there, and then I went to two more people who were a little bit more famous. Once I had about 6 people in the 24 CD box set, I started to go a little bit higher. And then once I had about 12, I then aimed for some really big names. So for me, that was a guy called Peter, who ran a record label called Mego in Vienna. And, you know, if I'd asked him at the beginning and said, hey, Peter, would you be in this box set? And there was no one else in the box set, he probably would have said no. But by building enough of a coalescing chunk of stuff, I was able to get him. And that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed that little video. I did it actually just on the spur of the moment to show Anders something about content marketing. And I'm going to be doing more of these videos and putting them onto YouTube, because apparently YouTube's the future. But I'm about 10 years too late. So anyway, there you go. Okay, love you. Bye.